My name is James Carter. I am 32 years old, the founder and CEO of Carter Tech Innovations, a company I built from scratch into a multi-billion-dollar empire. People see me as powerful, decisive, and untouchable. But that night at the Golden Plate, Portland's most exclusive restaurant, I wasn't thinking about market share or acquisitions. As I sat alone at a corner table swirling my glass of Cabernet, I felt a gnawing emptiness in my chest. Little did I know that within an hour, a little girl in a faded yellow dress would shatter everything I thought I knew about success, wealth, and the true meaning of life. The restaurant was glowing that night, a sanctuary of flickering candlelight and quiet murmurs echoing off marble floors. My suit clung perfectly to my frame, my silk tie cinched just below my throat, like a silent reminder of who I had become. I lifted my glass of deep burgundy Cabernet, watching the liquid swirl in elegant crimson ribbons. This was supposed to be my victory dinner. My stocks had doubled. My net worth had never been higher. Yet as I scrolled through the glowing numbers on my phone, I felt nothing. The taste of triumph was as bland as the stale breadbasket in front of me. I sighed, forcing myself to focus on the quiet luxury around me, the golden chandeliers casting soft halos on the polished floors, the aroma of garlic butter and truffle oil curling through the air. But the emptiness inside me refused to be silenced. For a moment I thought about my father, about how he used to say that money was power and power was everything. That night I believed him less than ever. Then I saw her. A flicker in the corner of my eye, a small figure by the window, framed by the glow of passing headlights. I turned my gaze, expecting to see a beggar. Portland had its share of lost souls wandering the streets at night. But this wasn't just another homeless shadow. She couldn't have been more than 5. Her yellow dress was faded and thin, clinging to her small shoulders like tissue paper. Her sandals were cracked and frayed, exposing pale toes curled against the cold pavement. She was staring at me. No, at my plate. At the half-eaten lobster tail draped in garlic butter and herbs. Her eyes burned with a hunger that wasn't just physical. It was a desperation that clawed through the glass walls of my privilege and reached deep into my chest. "Can I have the rest of your food, mister?" Her voice was a whisper I almost didn't hear over the soft jazz playing in the dining room. But those words, they struck me like a slap to the face. For a second, my instinct was to wave her away. Call security. That's what people like me do, right? We keep our world clean, untouched. But something in her eyes stopped me. Something that twisted a rusty old key inside my ribcage. A memory. A feeling I thought I'd buried beneath suits, boardrooms, and 6-figure watches. It was the look I once saw in the mirror as a boy. Alone, unseen, forgotten. I froze my fork, hovering in the air. The waiter began approaching, sensing trouble, but I raised my hand to stop him. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant seemed to blur out of focus, leaving only her, this fragile girl, and her question. I pushed the plate toward her. "Take it," I said, my voice so cold and hollow it scared me. I wanted to sound kind, generous, but all that came out was emptiness. She blinked, startled. Then, instead of devouring the food as I expected, she pulled a crumpled plastic bag from her pocket and gently, almost reverently, slid the lobster tail and vegetables inside. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. Then she turned and ran her thin legs, disappearing into the darkened street beyond the glowing restaurant windows. I sat there staring at the empty plate, my chest tight. I should have felt proud, triumphant, even like I had done a good deed. But something was wrong. Why didn't she eat right there? Why the rush? Where was she going with that food? I tried to shake the questions away. tried to refocus on the flickering candlelight and the low hum of polite laughter around me. But her eyes haunted me, burned into my mind, like an afterimage of something too bright to look at directly. Without thinking, I stood, dropped a wad of cash onto the table and strode out, ignoring the curious glances of men in tailored suits and women draped in diamonds. As I stepped into the Portland night, the cold air slammed into me sharp and sobering. My shoes clicked against the damp pavement as I scanned the empty street, searching for a small figure in a yellow dress. Why was I doing this? Why did I care I had a meeting at 8 the next morning? A merger to finalize, deals to close. But none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was finding her. Knowing why she looked at me like I was something more than just another rich man ignoring her pain. Then I saw her. Running down the block, her plastic bag clutched tight to her chest. Without hesitation, I followed. I didn't know then that this decision to follow a starving child into the shadows of my city would rip apart everything I believed about wealth power and who I was as a man. But in that moment, all I felt was the pounding of my heart against my ribs, echoing a truth I'd spent my life trying to ignore. No amount of money can save you from yourself, I ran. The street lamps cast long streaks of amber light onto rain-slicked pavement, each gleam illuminating cracks in the sidewalk and faded graffiti etched into Portland's forgotten walls. My Italian leather shoes slapped against the wet concrete, echoing off silent buildings with every desperate step. In that moment, I wasn't James Carter, CEO of Carter Tech, the man whose signature closed billion-dollar deals or whose glare sent interns scattering down marble hallways. I was just a man chasing a child into the night, my lungs burning with regret I didn't yet understand. She darted around a corner, swallowed by darkness, so complete it felt alive. My chest heaved as I reached the alley entrance. The world narrowed to trembling shadows and distant horns echoing from streets where life carried on oblivious. For a moment, I saw nothing. Only leaking pipes dripping against brick walls, my ragged breathing loud in my ears. Then movement. Kneeling on the cold concrete was a little girl in a yellow dress, its hem torn and soaked, pooling around her like wilted petals clinging to a dying stem. Beside her lay another child, smaller, curled on her side, brown curls damp against a fever-slicked forehead. Her chest rose and fell so shallowly, I wasn't sure she was breathing at all. My knees weakened. My pulse thundered, drowning out the hiss of leaking pipes and distant traffic. The older girl, Lily Grace, I would later learn, shook her sister gently, her voice raw with desperation. "Ella Faith, wake up, sissy. I brought food. Lobster just like Grandma Rose used to talk about. Please wake up." I wanted to speak to comfort, but I was frozen. The alley stank of rot and damp concrete, overpowered by the haunting sweetness of leftover garlic butter clinging to the greasy paper bag in her hands. My crisp French cuffs brushed my wrists like shackles as my fingers clenched and unclenched. Finally, I forced myself forward. Gravel crunched under my shoes. She flinched, spinning towards me, wide brown eyes locking onto mine. There was no fear in them, only exhaustion, a weariness that made her look ancient, despite her child's face, as if life had already taught her every brutal lesson. I crouched beside her, cold soaking through my tailored suit. None of it mattered. I reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the back of Ella Faith's small hand. Her skin burned with fever, her pulse fluttering weakly beneath paper-thin flesh. What happened to her? I asked, my voice breaking under the weight of grief I didn't yet fully claim. Tears blurred her small, fragile face. Lily Grace didn't look away. She's been sick. She whispered, shoulders curling inward. She didn't eat yesterday. or today. I thought, maybe if she tasted lobster, she'd wake up. The world tilted. 2 blocks away, people were paying $500 for plates of lobster while this child prayed her sister would survive the night. My throat closed around a scream I couldn't release. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands, dialing 911. My voice cracked as I gave the cross streets describing the emergency. As I hung up, I noticed the silver locket clutched to Lily's chest. I leaned closer, blinking tears away, to see the tiny photo inside. A smiling old woman with wise eyes and white hair. My heart clenched. She used to tell us stories, Lily said softly, following my gaze. She promised we wouldn't end up like this. She said, "People are good deep down, they just forget." Grandma Rose. The same woman who once saved me when I was just another hungry boy sleeping under bridges and dreaming of warmth I'd never known. She fed me, clothed me, gave me hope, and I repaid her by disappearing into ambition, never looking back. And now here I was, staring into the eyes of her granddaughters as they lay dying behind a 5-star restaurant. I knew her. I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. She saved me once, and I failed her. But I won't fail you. Sirens wailed closer, their sharp cries slicing through the quiet. Paramedics rushed into the alley, radios crackling, gloves snapping on. I stayed crouched beside Lily Grace and Ella Faith, my hand pressed against Lily's trembling back as silent sobs shook her thin shoulders. For the first time in decades, I felt something real, something human. As the ambulance lights bathed the alley in white gold glare, I made a silent vow, whatever it took, whoever I had to become, these girls would never feel forgotten again. I stood at the mouth of the alley, freezing the cold wind whipping my face as I watched the little girl in the yellow dress kneel beside a figure barely visible in the dim light of a flickering streetlight. My breath caught in my chest as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. She was kneeling beside another child, a girl even younger than her, maybe 2 years old. The child lay motionless on the wet concrete, her tiny chest rising and falling so shallowly that I thought she wasn't breathing. Her lips were cracked dry as old parchment. Her skin glowed with a feverish sheen that made my stomach twist with fear. Ella Faith, the older girl, whispered, her voice shaking, cracking with desperation as she gently shook her sister's limp shoulder. "Wake up, honey, please. I brought you food, lobster, just like Grandma Rose used to tell us. Remember, she said we'd taste it like rich people one day." Her words stabbed me with a sharp pain, like glass cutting straight through my ribs. I stepped forward, gravel crunching under my shoes, and she flinched at the sound. She turned her head slowly, and for the first time I saw her face clearly. Lily Grace. Her big brown eyes locked with mine. Eyes filled with a sadness so vast, so ancient, it took the air out of my lungs. There was no fear in those eyes, only exhaustion, a weary resignation I'd seen before in war documentaries or famine photographs, but never this close. Never in a child. I knelt, my knees pressed into the cold concrete, my expensive sweatpants soaked with moisture. But I didn't care. None of the fact that I was a CEO, a billionaire, an untouchable, powerful man mattered in that moment. All I saw was this tiny girl clutching her sister's bony hand, her small shoulders shaking under the weight of a world that had shattered her spirit. "Is she your sister?" I asked, my voice cracking with grief in my throat. Lily nodded without looking at me, tears streaming silently down her dirty cheeks. "She's so hot, she's been asleep too long, she needs food. She needs it, she needs it." Her words dissolved into a sob. She pulled out the crumpled plastic bag she'd brought from the restaurant and took the lobster tail with shaking hands. Its heady scent filled the cold alley, curling into the darkness like a cruel mockery of hope. "Hey, wake up," she whispered again, gently pressing the food to her sister's chapped lips. "Taste it. Please. You promised me." Grandma said she said we'd be okay. Something inside me broke. My vision blurred with tears as I looked down at the smaller Ella Faith. Her small chest heaved in shallow, strained breaths. Her fever was so intense that I could feel the heat radiating from her frail body even in the cold night air. I reached out, smoothing a stray lock of hair from her damp forehead. Her skin was hot, sticky, so fragile it felt like it would bruise under the slightest touch. My heart pounded painfully in my chest as guilt coursed through my veins like ice water. How could this be happening? 2 blocks away, people were spending $500 on a lobster roll while this child was starving. How could I sit there shaking my wine glasses, checking my stocks, pretending that my success meant anything in a world that allowed this? "She needs help," I whispered, my voice shaking as I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I dialed 911, and when the dispatcher answered, my words were rough, broken, desperate. "There's a child. 2 children. One is unresponsive. She has a fever. Please send someone. Please." When I hung up, Lily Grace held her sister tighter, her tears falling onto Ella's fevered skin. Her tiny body shook with silent sobs as she rocked back and forth, whispering words I couldn't hear, prayers, please, memories of a long-dead grandmother's promise. I realized then, staring at the 2 of them in that dark, dank alley, that nothing in my life really mattered. Not the mergers, not the money, not the power. Because if my success couldn't save them, what was it worth? I reached out and placed my hand gently on Lily's thin shoulder. She flinched, but didn't pull away. She just whispered to her sister, her voice hoarse and sorrowful. "Grandma Rose said the rich were good on the inside," she sobbed. "She said they just forgot." I closed my eyes as the sirens blared. As I sat there, my hand trembling on Lily's thin shoulder, she reached into her dress pocket with her free hand. Her small fingers fumbled before pulling out something wrapped in old newspaper. She unfolded it carefully, as if revealing a priceless treasure, and held it out to me. It was a crust of stale bread, hard as stone. Mold clung to its edges like decay, refusing to let go. "She tried to eat this last night," Lily whispered, her voice breaking like glass underfoot. Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks as her eyes burned into mine, wide with shame and sorrow. I told her not to. I told her I'd find something better today. She cried so much because she was hungry, and I slapped her. Her small chest heaved with sobs so deep they seemed to tear her apart from the inside. I slapped her because she wouldn't stop crying, because I couldn't stand it anymore. I told her to shut up, and now she won't wake up. Her words tore through me like a serrated blade scraping bone. I stared at the rock-hard piece of bread in her shaking hand, feeling my soul collapse in on itself. The truth of it, this tiny girl carrying the guilt of striking her dying sister because she couldn't bear the sound of hunger anymore, was a cruelty so profound it scorched the air from my lungs. In that moment, I didn't just feel pity or sorrow. I felt horror. The horror of a world where a child's love became violence because her hope was wrung dry. The horror of realizing I had built a life so far above pain that I no longer recognized it until it screamed in my face. Lily buried her face in her sister's fevered neck, her small shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded like a wounded animal. "I'm sorry, Ella Faith," she cried, her words muffled by tangled curls and damp skin. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. Please wake up. I'll never hurt you again. I promise." And all I could do was kneel there in my $1,000 shoes, my polished life cracking like cheap porcelain. as I watched a 5-year-old beg forgiveness from a sister she thought she had killed with her own desperate hands. I watched her small hands trembling as she held the silver locket against her chest. The chain was thin, almost broken in places, but she clutched it like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. Her tears fell silently onto the metal, streaking it with salt and grief. "Who's in the photo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as if speaking any louder would shatter her into pieces too small to gather. Lily sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her dirt-smeared hand before flipping the locket open. She turned it towards me with such reverence it felt like she was revealing a holy relic. My breath caught in my chest. Inside was a small, faded photograph, its edges worn and curling from years of being opened and closed by tiny fingers seeking comfort. The woman in the photo had snow-white hair pinned back in a bun, soft lines framing kind, wise eyes that seemed to look right through the camera and into your soul. For a moment, the world around me fell away. The cold alley, the damp concrete beneath my knees, even the rising wail of approaching ambulance sirens faded to a distant hum. All I could see was her face. Grandma Rose Lily whispered, her voice cracking with grief. She used to tell us stories about angels. She said no matter what, people are good inside. They just forget sometimes. A sob clawed its way up my throat as memories slammed into me with the force of a freight train. I was no longer James Carter, billionaire CEO, kneeling in an alley beside 2 starving children. I was a ragged, filthy boy again, no older than Lily, with bruised knees and an empty stomach, huddled against the back steps of a city church. I remembered that winter night, the biting wind tearing through my thin jacket. My fingers so numb, I couldn't even feel the hunger gnawing at my gut. I thought I would die there, cold and alone, just another forgotten street kid no one would mourn. But then she appeared. Grandma Rose. She smelled like lavender soap and fresh bread. Her warm hands wrapped around mine, thawing my frozen skin. She brought me inside, gave me a blanket, hot soup, a place to sleep. And for the first time in my short, broken life, someone looked at me and didn't see trash. She saw a boy worth saving. She became my lifeline, my anchor. Every day she fed me, clothed me, taught me how to read, how to pray, how to hope. And when I turned 18, I left to chase my ambition, promising I'd return to repay her kindness. But I never did. I buried her letters under stacks of merger contracts. I ignored her calls between private jet flights and shareholder meetings. I told myself she was fine without me, that someday when I wasn't so busy building my empire, I'd go back. I'd sit at her kitchen table again and thank her for saving my life. But someday never came. And now, kneeling here decades later, staring at her face in a locket held by her starving granddaughter, guilt ripped through me so violently I felt physically sick. The world tilted sideways as nausea twisted my gut and tears burned my eyes. She saved me once, I whispered, my voice hoarse with grief and self-loathing. Your grandma, she saved me when I was just like you. Hungry, alone, forgotten. Lily blinked up at me through her tears, confusion flickering across her gaunt face. You knew Grandma Rose? She asked softly, as if she couldn't quite believe it. I nodded, swallowing hard against the ache in my chest. I did. She was my family when I had none. I promised her I'd come back for her, that I'd repay her someday. But I didn't. I left, and I never looked back. Fresh tears slid down her cheeks, carving pale streaks through the grime. She didn't say anything, just pressed her forehead against her sister's and closed her eyes, holding the locket tightly between them, as if it could fuse all their broken pieces back together. The ambulance lights finally reached us, painting the alley in red and blue flashes. Paramedics jumped out, pulling a stretcher behind them, their voices urgent but distant in my ringing ears. As they lifted Ella Faith onto the gurney, her small body limp and feverish, Lily turned to me, her eyes wide and glassy with fear. "You won't leave us, right?" she whispered. "Please don't leave us." Her words pierced deeper than any blade. I reached out and cupped her cold, tear-streaked face in my trembling hand. "I won't," I whispered fiercely, the vow ripping from somewhere deep inside my bones. "I swear to you, Lily Grace, I will never leave you. Not ever." Because in that moment, I finally understood what Grandma Rose had always known: saving someone isn't charity, it's redemption. And maybe, just maybe, saving them now was the only way left to save myself. My hands shook so violently, I almost dropped my phone. As I dialed 911, each number blurred before my eyes, my vision distorted by tears I refused to let fall. The call connected, and I pressed the phone to my ear with trembling fingers. 911, what is your emergency? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing, but my voice came out raw, cracked, desperate. "There's a child," I choked out, glancing at Ella Faith's limp body cradled in her sister's thin arms. "2 children. One is unresponsive, burning with fever. They're starving. Please send someone, hurry." The dispatcher's calm voice felt like an insult against the rising panic in my chest. She asked for the location, and I gave it to her, the words tumbling out in jagged gasps. When the call ended, I let the phone fall into my lap. I reached out and placed my hand gently on Ella's burning forehead. Her skin felt like fire beneath my cool fingers. Her breath came in tiny, strained wheezes that sounded like a dying bird's final song. Beside her, Lily Grace sobbed quietly, pressing her face into her sister's tangled curls. Her shoulders shook with each silent wail, but she never let go of the locket clutched in her fist. "Please wake up, Ella," she whispered, her voice splintering with each syllable. I promised you, lobster. I promised you it would taste like heaven." My chest caved in around my heart. The pain was so sharp it stole my breath. I felt like I was drowning in guilt and grief and rage at a world that let this happen, rage at myself for every choice that led me here too late. The distant wail of sirens began to rise, echoing through the narrow alleyway, growing louder with each passing second. But all I could hear was Lily's broken whispers and Ella's ragged breathing. I turned to Lily Grace. She was staring at me now, her wide brown eyes shimmering with tears and terror, her small chest heaving as if she couldn't draw in enough air to stay alive. Are they coming?" she asked in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it. I nodded, forcing myself to swallow back the sob clawing up my throat. "They're coming, Lily," I whispered. "They'll take care of Ella. She's going to be okay." Her tears fell faster. "What about me?" she whispered. "What happens to me when they take her away?" Her question ripped through me like shrapnel. I cupped her face in my shaking hand, feeling the cold dampness of her tears soaking into my palm. "You're not going anywhere alone," I said. My voice fierce, trembling with a vow I didn't even realize I'd been carrying inside me for years. "I'm going to take care of you both. Do you hear me? I promise." She blinked at me, her lips trembling. But why, she asked, her voice barely audible over the approaching sirens. I felt something inside me fracture the last brittle piece of the man I had become, shattering into dust. My vision blurred as memories of Grandma Rose filled my mind. Her kind smile, her gentle voice telling me I was worth loving when the world had convinced me otherwise. Because someone once saved me, I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks unchecked. And I never got to thank her. I never came back. But I can't. I can't walk away again. Not from you. The ambulance pulled into the alley, its flashing red lights painting everything in harsh, jarring pulses. Paramedics jumped out, their voices quick and clipped as they surrounded us. They lifted Ella Faith onto the stretcher, checking her vitals, slipping an oxygen mask over her tiny face. One of them asked me questions I barely heard. All I could see was Lily Grace clutching her locket, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she watched them wheel her sister away. "Come with us," one paramedic said gently, reaching out a hand to Lily. But she recoiled, her eyes darting to me in wide, desperate terror. I reached down and scooped her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing, her frail body curling against my chest like a wounded bird seeking warmth. I held her tightly, feeling her tears soak through my shirt as I whispered into her tangled hair. "I've got you," I murmured, my voice breaking with the weight of my promise. "I'm not letting go. Not ever again." As I carried her out of the alley and into the flashing chaos of emergency lights and shouted orders, I felt something deep inside me shift. For the first time in years, the emptiness in my chest didn't feel quite so hollow. Because in that moment, I understood this wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was redemption. And I would spend every last breath I had making sure they never felt alone again. The days blurred from gray dawns to sleepless nights under the sterile fluorescent lights of the hospital. I barely left their rooms. My tailored suits lay untouched in the clothes bags piled in the corner, replaced by simple cotton shirts and jeans I hadn't worn in years. My assistant called, emailed, texted constantly about board meetings, acquisition deals, urgent signatures needed to keep the Carter Tech empire running. But I ignored them all. Because nothing mattered anymore. Every morning I sat by Ella Faith's hospital bed, watching her small breasts rise and fall under the thin sheets, her frail body dwarfed by the machines around her. IVs snaked into her bruised arms, delivering nutrients her starved body could barely absorb. She slept for days, her eyelids fluttering with fever, her cracked lips parting only to whisper hoarse, broken words I couldn't understand. Beside her, Lily Grace never left. She refused to sleep on the cot the nurses brought in, choosing instead to curl up next to Ella, her small arms sheltering her sister's thin ribs. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find her awake, staring into the darkness with eyes too old for her face. Eyes that had seen more hunger, fear, and loss in 5 years than most people do in a lifetime. Sometimes I'd stroke her tangled hair back and whisper, "Try to sleep, Lily. I'm right here." She turned to look at me, her gaze steady, fierce, even in her exhaustion. "What if I sleep?" she whispered once. "What if she wakes up and you're not here? What if she thinks I've abandoned her too?" Her words cut into me like broken glass, sharp and cruel. I reached out and cupped her little cheek in my palm. "You're the bravest girl I've ever known," I said, my voice breaking, as I felt her warmth seep into my cold fingers. "But you don't have to be brave alone anymore." She blinked at me, her lashes wet with unshed tears, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to her sister and kissed Ella's burning forehead. Every day the doctors told me she was getting better, slowly. Her body was fighting to regain what had been lost from months of starvation. But each improvement felt like a fragile miracle that I was afraid to believe in. I sat in consultations with pediatric nutritionists, therapists, social workers. Each conversation left me feeling like a lost child, unprepared and ashamed for having lived so long, believing that wealth could shield me from the naked truth of human suffering. One evening, as dusk cast a golden glow on the sterile white walls, Ella Faith stirred, for the first time in days. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes as brown and bright as her sister's. They scanned the room hazily before settling on Lily's tear-stained face. "Baby, I'm awake," Lily sobbed, burying her face in her sister's thin chest. "Did you bring me food?" "You brought lobster like Grandma Rose said. We're safe now." Ella blinked slowly, her chapped lips curling into a weak smile as her small hand reached up to tug weakly at Lily's hair. Looking at them, something inside me broke. Tears streamed down my face, unstoppable and unashamed. I realized then that I hadn't cried in years. Not when I buried Rose. Not when my company went public. Not when I signed the divorce papers. But here I was sobbing in the children's hospital room because a hungry child had opened his eyes. That night, I sat outside their room, my knees in my hands, the city lights flickering outside my window. My phone rang beside me with another call from my CFO. I let it ring until it stopped. I told the board that I was resigning indefinitely. Of course, they didn't understand. They thought I was sick or dead. Perhaps in a way they were right, because the man who entered the golden plate that night was dead. The man who emerged from the back alley was reborn. Every day Lily grew stronger. Her cheeks had a healthy flush. Her eyes no longer dull with hunger, but bright with cautious hope. She talked more, told me stories about Grandma Rose, about the games she used to play with Ella before life became about hunting for food and avoiding the men who stalked the streets at night. And each day, as I watched her brush her sister's hair, sing lullabies in a voice too small to carry such ancient sorrow, I felt something inside me knit back together. Something I hadn't known was broken. Because in saving them, I was learning how to save myself. Each morning, I woke before dawn to the sound of hospital monitors humming softly and the faint rustle of Lily Grace stirring in her sleep. She always slept lightly, curled protectively around her sister, as if afraid the world might steal her away in the dark. I would watch them for hours before the sun rose, their small bodies tucked under thin blankets, the faint glow of the hallway lights illuminating the smudges of old bruises fading from their skin. Sometimes Lily would open her eyes and catch me watching her. She'd blink slowly, then reach for her silver locket and press it to her lips before closing her eyes again. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted gold across the hospital walls, I sat beside her bed and asked, "Why do you always hold that locket so tightly, Lily?" She looked at me for a long time, her brown eyes wide and solemn, older than any child's eyes should be. Then wordlessly, she opened the locket and turned it towards me. Inside, Grandma Rose smiled back at me with that same soft kindness I remembered from decades ago, the crinkle lines around her eyes, the thin lips pulled into a gentle smile that made you believe, even for a moment, that the world was good. She promised me, Lily whispered, her voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear her. She said no matter how bad things get, there's always good in people, even if they forget it sometimes. She said one day someone would remember. I swallowed hard, feeling something sharp and bitter lodge in my throat. She was right. I managed my voice breaking under the weight of her truth. She was always right. For years, I had measured my worth by numbers on a screen, stock prices, net profit, acquisition targets. I told myself success was about how many people feared my power or craved my approval. I believed love was a transaction, something earned or leveraged, given only when it made strategic sense. But sitting there watching Lily hold that tiny silver locket like it was life itself, I realized I had been wrong all along. Because in her eyes, success wasn't about money or power. It was about moments. Small, fleeting moments where you chose kindness over indifference, mercy over pride. Moments where you looked at someone and truly saw them, their hunger, their fear, their hope, and decided that their pain was your pain too. That was what Grandma Rose had taught me when I was a starving boy with torn shoes and bloody knees. And that was what I had forgotten as I clawed my way up the ladder of success, stepping on the backs of people just like Lily Grace to build my empire. But she, this small girl with eyes as dark and deep as old coffee, remembered. Even after the world had stolen everything from her, even after hunger carved hollows into her cheeks and grief tore holes in her heart, she held on to that one truth: people are good. They just forget. That morning, as the sun rose higher and spilled gold across her sleeping sister's face, I reached out and took her small hand in mine. "I'm going to remember," I whispered, my voice trembling with a vow I didn't know I still had the strength to make. "From today, I promise you, Lily, I'll never forget again." She blinked at me, a single tear sliding down her cheek as she squeezed my fingers tightly. Then she closed her locket and tucked it under her hospital gown, curling up beside Ella Faith and drifting back to sleep. I sat there for hours after listening to the quiet rhythm of their breathing, feeling a warmth spread through my chest I hadn't felt in decades. A warmth that had nothing to do with success or ambition or victory. It was love. Simple, undemanding, pure. And for the first time in my 52 years, I understood success without love is hollow. Power without kindness is poison. Wealth without mercy is death. In the end, what matters is not how much you earn or build or conquer, but how deeply you love. And how bravely you choose to remember that every person you meet carries a silent, desperate hope to be seen and to be saved. It had been almost 3 weeks since I'd first found them in that dark alley, and life had settled into a rhythm of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and long, quiet evenings spent reading children's books in soft voices. Every day, Ella Faith grew stronger. Her cheeks were rosy now, her laughter like little bells ringing off the sterile white walls. Lily Grace had softened too. Her eyes were still dark, but at night she curled up next to me on the couch in their makeshift hospital room, her head resting against my arm, as if she finally believed she wouldn't wake up alone. Then, on a drizzly Tuesday morning, my phone rang. I stepped out into the hallway to answer it, watching the raindrops roll down the wide windows overlooking Portland's gray skyline. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice said, professional but warm. "This is Claire Michael Reed's counselor at Redwood Rehabilitation. I'm calling because Michael has made significant progress and has been asked to meet his daughters." I felt my pulse quicken, a knot of complicated emotions swirling in my chest. For days I had been preparing for this moment, knowing it would come, but never feeling ready. I swallowed, pressing my palms against the cool glass as I looked out at the city below. "Is he ready?" I asked softly, my voice hoarse even to my own ears. "He's been sober for almost 6 months," she replied softly. "He understands that it will take time to rebuild trust, but he wants to try." After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of hospital life around me. Nurses pacing the polished floors, the beeping of monitors, the soft murmur of doctors consulting over charts. Then I turned and walked into the room where Lily and Ella were huddled under the covers, watching an old cartoon on the small TV mounted on the wall. "Girls," I said softly, sitting down beside them. They both turned to look at me, Ella's small hand instinctively finding Lily's. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Your father wants to see you. He's been working so hard to get better, and he misses you." For a long moment, silence filled the room, heavy and shaky. Then Lily spoke, her voice so small, it felt like a thread being pulled and frayed. Do you think he'll be different this time? I reached up to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, my hand still on her thin cheek. I think I said carefully that he's trying. But it's okay to be scared, Lily. Take it easy. She blinked rapidly, her lashes wet with tears she didn't want to shed. Then she nodded, her lips pressed together before turning to Ella and brushing her sister's hair back from her forehead. The day of the reunion arrived with low gray clouds hovering over the city. I drove them to Redwood Rehabilitation, in silence the rumble of the car engine, accentuating their strained breathing. When we arrived, Lily held my hand so tightly that I could feel her little bones pressing into my knuckles. Inside, the counselor led us to a private visiting room, lined with faded couches and a table covered with boxes of cheap tissues.